Thank you very much. Good morning. Interestingly, you've picked up on the fact that everybody calls me Kenny, and although my name's Kenneth, and it's a funny thing working in data quality, because there is actually a Kenny MacKinnon that also works on Lloyds Banking Group, and lots of people email him when they're trying to get to me, and I don't get the emails. So it's every day I encounter data quality, I guess. Can you not hear? Sorry, have I not turned this on? Right, I'll speak up. Apologies. So yes, Kenneth MacKinnon. Everyone calls me Kenny. I work in Lloyds Banking Group in information architecture, and over the past couple of years I've been working in data quality. And yes, as Julian described, I was asked to present a counterbalance to all the good work that's been going on in data quality dimensions. Which is a bit of an interesting thing to be asked to do, is to come in and say, well, we've done all this work, but actually we don't think it's good. So, but hopefully what I'm here to do today is just balance the debate, question whether we're focusing our time in the right places or whether there's other things we need to be doing. So I put this disclaimer in, and I wasn't really going to talk about it, but because I actually don't think it's that important. But two things struck me as I did it. One was, and Julian very kindly hid my blushes. Originally, I'd made a few clangers in this slide, and there were some typos. I'm notoriously bad, always making typos. And last year I was fortunate enough to work for a while with Ken O'Connor, and Ken, who's a great guy to bounce ideas off, to talk data quality with, to talk about what you're doing and share experience and knowledge and so on, is also very, very pernickety. And he spent a lot of time, when I sent him papers for review, coming back and saying, here's all your typos. And so that made me think of Ken, and it also made me think of the fact that actually, whilst I'm saying these are my views, they're not just my views, they're the views of the people who I've been lucky enough to talk to exchange discussions with on LinkedIn and other forums, whose articles I've read, and so on. So they're an amalgamation, I think, of a lot of information and thinking that's out there. So it's not purely 100% my own thoughts. It's a kind of meta-analysis in a way. And I've tried to, where I've referenced people's work or I've quoted them, make that clear in what I'm going to say today. But if for any reason I haven't, then this is my apology. And if you feel particularly aggrieved, I'll buy you a drink or something at some point in time. So thank you very much for that. So my career began approximately 15 years ago in Scottish Widows as an IT programmer. I was a mainframe programmer. I know I look far too young to be a mainframe programmer, no, but I was. And you very quickly learn the jargon of programming. So as a mainframe programmer, you talk about things like DBDs and PSBs and ACBs and gens and regions and append codes and all that kind of stuff. And it's a language to itself, not even the programming language, all the technicalities around it. And IT has really always been one of these areas where people think about jargon, and they think of it full of jargon and special terms, and it's impenetrable to anybody who's not in IT. And I think one of my favourite scenes in the Channel 4 series, The IT Crowd, I don't know if any of you ever watched The IT Crowd, it's in the first episode, and this Jen, she's a manager, she's bluffed her way into the organisation by saying she knows something about IT. She's been dropped into the basement to be the manager of the IT department, and she turns to Moss, who's this uber geek, wild hair and tie that doesn't match his shirt and all the rest of that, and she says to him, so what is it you're doing? And Moss proceeds to explain to her in really technical language what it is he's doing, and Jen's standing there going noddingly, yeah. And then you see it from Jen's perspective, and she actually isn't hearing a single word. All she's hearing is static, just yeah. That's IT jargon for you, isn't it? My work with Scottish Widows obviously is an insurance company, and they're part of Lloyds Banking Group, and I still spend roughly half my time on the insurance side. Insurance has its jargon as well, and very quickly as you move from being a software developer into a designer and somebody that has to maybe stand in front of stakeholders, business sponsors, reps, etc., and explain to them, how your system design is going to meet their requirements. You have to also talk the language of insurance. So there's a whole set of jargon that you have to learn in insurance about things and terms like GARs and MVRs and AMC and basis points, mortality and admin charges and so on. And probably to people outside of insurance, not a lot of that makes an awful lot of sense either. And what you have to learn, and to me one of the key skills that I learned as my career progressed and I moved from programmer to designer into architect, is that key skill of translation. You have to be able to talk as an architect, be equally as capable of talking in the technical language of the systems and the programs and the technologies being used as you are in the language of the business. And you have to be able to translate between the two so that you can explain to the technical people what it is you're trying to deliver for the business, but also to the business people how the technology is going to meet their requirements. And that to me is a key attribute of a good architect at any level in an organisation, is that translation role. If you cannot translate, then you're really, really going to struggle. But IT and insurance are far from unique in having terminologies. And just as a final example, I'm chair of my local high school's parent council. And as part of that, I'm involved just now in the selection process for a new deputy head teacher. And very quickly, once again, I'm in a whole other world of language and jargon. So there's phrases like leeting, GURFEC, CPDs, and many other things. Leeting, by the way, is basically shortlisting. Why don't they call it shortlisting? I don't know. It's called leeting. GURFEC stands for Getting It Right for Every Child, and is government policy, or Scottish government policy. But it's a whole new, once again, I spent the first night I sat reading application forms for this post. So I'm looking at all these acronyms and going, I don't know what these are, and I'm on Google and I'm trying to find them out, and I'm emailing the head teacher trying to understand it a bit more. So once again, you have to learn the jargon, and I think it's a key thing in any walk of life, across any field in the world. There is specific terminology, and I think it's part of human nature that we seem to create, almost on a kind of tribal or cultural level. We have a language, and it's a way of identifying and being part of that tribe or culture is you can speak the language. So it's something there. But I think also, I really like this quote from Douglas Adams. It's in the So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, when they're talking about the man that they were calling the rain god. Let's be straight here. If we find something we can't understand, we like to call it something you can't understand or indeed pronounce. It's a form of power. It's a form of showing that you're more knowledgeable than somebody else. And I think Douglas Adams, he was having a pop at the science and the medicine community when he did that. And I think it's absolutely, a key thing that we need to do. And data quality and data architecture has its own fair share of jargon as well. And as I said earlier, I've been working in data quality for around 2 years, and I still view myself in many ways as relatively new. But one of the first things you have to do in any new field, and there's a number of times in my career where I've walked into something I've never worked on before, and you have to very quickly learn the jargon. Because how do you appear to be credible? How do you appear to be credible with your peers? Is you use the same language, you understand what they mean when they use technical terms. Otherwise you just look like somebody who's just fresh off the streets and hasn't got a clue. So that's a really key bit of working in data quality, is knowing what we mean when we say all these terms like profiling, assessment, dimensions, metrics, measures, tolerances. But I guess the problem I have is, how well understood is that outside of the data quality environment? How well understood is that outside of the people who are actually working in data quality? And is that the right thing to do? Why have I gone to break? What's happened? I didn't touch anything, did I? Oh, yes. There, that's us. Right, excellent. It would be fantastic to think that in terms of data quality or any other part of data, that we could come up with a set of terms and just get on with using them. But I think also there's something in the nature of data people that we strive for perfection. We love nothing better than to debate things and to rework things and to find a better version of things. And I don't think that that's something that's ever going to go away. And if you turn to data quality dimensions, these are a set that I basically harvested from some discussions on LinkedIn. And you can see there's lots of different ones. You can probably see some familiar ones. You can probably see some things that are similar to other things. And you can also see two that really, really stand out as coming across. So what I did was I took a couple of discussion forums where people were talking about metrics, and I just kept plugging them in. So every time completeness came in, I plugged completeness in, and then basically you get this frequency distribution. So completeness and accuracy come out as the two that people talk about most, that think about most, and in some cases many people view as the most important. Quite a lot of the forum discussions, as I'm sure you're aware, are things like which data quality dimension is the most important. To me, that's a bit of a non-debate, but I'll come to that. Within Lloyds Banking Group, we actually have 5 just now, and I inherited them from a predecessor. So far, I've not actually looked at changing them or altering the definitions. But I'm also very interested in what you've produced and saying, actually, should Lloyds adopt what's been proposed in the white paper. But our 5 just now are completeness, accuracy, validity, timeliness, and consistency. And the very interesting thing when you look at current experience and usage of these is completeness, accuracy, validity, people tend to in some way in some way inherently understand and know what it is and how to start to measure it. Timeliness is really a really interesting one. It's not a measurable thing, or it's a much more difficult thing to measure. And the really strange thing about consistency, just to put the context, is actually consistency of definition. Now, to me, consistency of definition is a root cause, or inconsistency of definition is probably a root cause, rather than a dimension of data that you can actually measure. Or it's a dimension of your metadata, I suppose, in many ways, rather than the data itself. So my current experience is the ones that we use are only partially understood and need a bit more work. And like I say, when we look at the dimensions that come out on the wider scale, there's a very strong leaning to completeness and accuracy. And I do have to wonder whether that's right or not. One of the discussions that I was involved in a few months ago was about what's the most important dimension to a process owner. Now, my argument was actually completeness, because if I'm the process owner of a mailing department, and my job is to make sure that the goods get mailed out once and done, Six Sigma or whatever else that you work to in terms of your process methodologies, then completeness is probably, I thought, would be the most important thing. If I haven't got an address, I can't mail it, therefore that's a process failure. But actually, when you think about it further, timeliness is important. If I haven't got an address at the time that I need to dispatch that goods, that's a process failure. Validity is important as well. If I haven't got an actual address, if I've just got gobbledygook at the time I want to dispatch the goods, that's a process failure. And the interesting one doesn't necessarily matter to the person that owns the process to dispatch the goods is accuracy. Because if he's not the person that's getting the customer complaint if the goods go to the wrong place, that's not necessarily showing up as a failure in his process. And that's a real human nature kind of thing, I think, is, if it's not impacting me, why am I going to care about it? And that, obviously, that's where we try and do broader things with things like data governance, to try and ensure the whole organisation starts to think about what's good for the organisation and not necessarily just what's good for an individual. The other parallel I draw in all this debate about dimensions and what are the dimensions and which ones are the right ones and which ones are the most important ones comes back to my work in enterprise architecture, where there's a lot of debate goes on about enterprise architecture frameworks and which framework should you use. Should it be TOGAF or Zachman or MODAF or DODAF or whatever else? And there was a piece of advice I scribbled down once in a Gartner conference, and I can't remember which analyst it was, but the advice was basically this: don't worry, pick one and get on with delivering value from an EA perspective. And I think that's something that we should really think about when it comes to data quality dimensions is, does it have to be the perfect set? Arguably not. Pick a set, get on, deliver dimensions. And this is, I guess, what comes to the nub of my point is, why do I think focusing on data quality dimensions is potentially a problem, is potentially a danger? Effectively, by focusing on the dimensions, we are all inside the club, inside the tent, getting our own tent in order. I'm not entirely sure about this analogy, but we'll keep going with it. But what about those outside the tent? Are they getting value from us spending our time and our energy worrying about have we got the perfect set of dimensions? Are they understanding what we're trying to achieve in data quality by us worrying about have we got the perfect set of dimensions? What is it actually that's the biggest challenge in data quality? What is the thing that time and time again people say when you talk about what are the problems with data quality? The problems with data quality generally come back to, how do we get the business case? How do we make the case to do something about the quality of the data in our organisations? How do we get the buy-in for the senior managers and the leaders in our organisation that data quality is a good thing to do and the right thing to do and needs time, focus, attention and resources put on it? That's the guys outside the tent, and that's the people that we need in order to be successful at our job in data quality. There was an article in the IT Online titled "Obtaining Executive Buy-in for Data Quality," and there's some really good quotes on it. And what it started with was this notion of data quality is actually still a relatively new discipline, and many senior executives are not accustomed to it and do not see it as a business issue. You still see that whole data, that's an IT thing, don't you? And what the article then went on to say is data quality professionals need to simplify the issues, explain the concepts in an understandable language in order to relate data quality to the issues senior executives face on a day-to-day basis. And I guess that's my danger in dimensions, and that's the worry, is when you do all your work in data quality, when you define your dimensions, define your rules, measure the quality of data against these rules, map them to the dimensions, aggregate them up, put them on a nice shiny dashboard. These aren't real numbers, by the way. I haven't just exposed some of Lloyd's data quality issues, don't worry. Does that really meet the needs? Does that really convey to your stakeholders the problem? One of the tricks I've learned in architecture over the years is the so what test. So when as an architect you come along and you say this is a suboptimal architecture, there's type coupling, there's poorly defined interfaces, the data model's not defined, or whatever else the architectural issue is, you need to pass the so what test. So if you take that to a senior leader in your organisation whose support you need to resolve that issue, you maybe want them to include some funding in their project to help remediate one or more of these problems that you've identified in the architecture. They're going to immediately ask, so what's in it for me? Why do I need to do this? And if you don't have an answer to that, then you're not going to get their support, and you're not going to get their buy-in, and you're not going to achieve your objectives. And I think it's the same with data quality. So when we produce figures, when we come up with our measurements, and we've done all that good work, if we cannot pass the so what test, then I really think that we're failing and we're missing a trick. I really like this statement from a chap called Thomas Tong on one of the LinkedIn forums as well. I think this really sums it up in data quality terms. The ultimate test of whether data quality dimensions, metrics, reporting frameworks, whatever other term you want to use, has any value relates to its impact on the business. Right, so what? So if I'm saying dimensions, they're not necessarily the whole tool, what is it do we think we should do? This came from one of Dylan Jones' articles on Data Quality Pro called A Simple Template for Crafting Your Data Quality Story. I really like it. I think it sets out a really simple framework for explaining to people what the issues are, why hasn't the issues been solved, what will we benefit from solving these issues, what should we do to make that happen. And I think the key thing if you look at the article and you look at the examples that Dylan has used, is the language is clear, there's no jargon in it, anybody can understand it, and it's absolutely related back to the issues of the business. So instead of saying things like the billing data is only 80% complete, you say things like we're risking customer complaints, or we're doing extra work, or we're not completing work in time because we don't have all the information we need to do the job. Simple language, clear, and obviously to a senior executive who's responsible for that department, an obvious issue that's going to be causing him pain, it's going to be causing him budget overruns, customer complaints, or whatever else that problem is. The other tool that I'm exploring in my work in Lloyd's, which I think actually could work, and I guess it depends on your organisation, is using the language of risk. So we have a risk framework for the whole group, and every division needs to have a risk log and needs to understand their operational risks or their capital risks and all the rest of that. And it gives you a standard language, to describe a risk, but also a standard framework by which you assess the risk. So if you go back to one of the age-old problems of data quality is, how do you assign the value? How do you actually say how much that issue is costing the business? Then actually, rather than coming up with a single number, you rate the risk on things like operational loss from 1 to 4, given certain bounds. So you're estimating within a certain big chunk of numbers rather than trying to come up with a precise number. Capital cost, the likelihood of customer complaint, the likelihood of regulatory censure, the likelihood of bad press, all these kind of factors. And then the risk engine itself magically, and it's secret sauce that only the risk people know about ultimately, the risk engine itself magically then comes up with a score for that risk. And if you put your data quality issues on the risk register and rank them and score them alongside all the other risks to your business, then immediately you're starting to prioritise that data quality problem alongside everything else that you're saying is a potential issue to your risk, to your business. And then arguably you're getting to a stage where you've already started to make that case for, should we invest in fixing these data quality problems as opposed to dealing with some other risk to your business like absence management or something else? Where should we best put our resources? How should we mitigate against this? So I think it could be a powerful way of doing it. I'm still working on how that would work, but I think it's actually another way of thinking about how to explain and bring to the fore data quality problems that you find in the organisation. So I'm almost finished, so in my conclusion, I'm not here to say don't use data quality dimensions. I think they're a useful tool. I think they drive thinking about data in ways that maybe haven't come to the fore. If you sit down with a customer and you talk about their data, they'll probably immediately jump to accuracy or validity. And if you've got all these other dimensions that almost you can use as a checklist to drive out other data quality rules and to ensure that you're measuring all the facets or aspects of the data to understand it, then I think that's a really good thing. The danger I fear is if we're focusing too heavily inside this tent of looking at and spending our energy on debating and deciding on what the perfect set of dimensions are, we lose sight of the bigger problem. And we lose sight of what we should be expending our energy on, which is building the business cases, influencing our key stakeholders, and getting the support we need. I will leave you one final quote from Ted Friedman in an interview in IT Business Edge. You don't do data quality because data quality has an inherent value. You do it because it enriches and makes more successful the business initiatives that you're trying to run. Thank you very much.
Have we got any questions for Kenneth?
Hi, this way. Hi.
Hi, can I just say, I couldn't explain it better. This is exactly what I've been working on with my team for the last 4 years. And you made the perfect case for why we should establish more the business impact of information quality and how risk can be involved and included in that. And Julian was actually currently just a review. We wrote a 500 pages book which comes out in November by Morgan Kaufman about how to include risk management, data management. Mm-hmm. And Julian was one of the reviewers on the book. And so I think it's really sort of the next step in data quality, in our opinion, where you stop, doing data quality in your lab, but you really say, okay, how can I solve actual business issues and put the number on how much does it improve using business metrics.
Well, thank you. It's really encouraging to hear that other people are thinking that way, and that there's lots of good work going on in that space. Yeah.
Thank you. Early plug for Alex's book.
Yeah, I look forward to the book as well.
It's called Total Information Risk Management.
Excellent.
Okay. Thanks for the presentation. I enjoyed that. In terms of what we're trying to do today, I think you mentioned it at the end. Using this as a checklist. Going into defining, any particular situation, what are the business critical activities and what are the business critical data within that. Is that checklist complete as far as you're concerned, based on what we've got, or do we need something else?
I guess this is my concern, and it's kind of the gist of what I was trying to say was, I think there are a number of varying views out there. You know, if you go back to that word scatter picture with all the various different terms, there are a number of varying views, and you know, you see some people talk about 4 standard data quality dimensions. Obviously, this white paper today's had 6. There was one article I read somewhere that talked about 16, and then somebody else that said, well, if you take these 16 dimensions and you apply it to these multiple different types of scenarios from an object orientation perspective, you actually end up with somewhere in the region of about 32 or 64 different actual definitions of what these dimensions would mean in different situations. And I think really what I'm trying to say is maybe we shouldn't worry too much about having a perfect 6 or having a perfect 10 or having a perfect 4. We should find what works for us in the scenario we're in and use them to then drive the value and to help the business to succeed.
I guess what I'm going from is, you know, if you've got a tool set, it's useful to have all the tools in the toolkit, even though you're not going to use them all. You know?
Yeah.
But at least you know that if you come across something, you've got somewhere to go to.
Yeah, I think so. But I think and you know, I think having a resource that says these are generally accepted terms of what we mean by these things is absolutely key. I suppose my worry is, will that be universally adopted? I don't think so. So does that mean you can walk from one organisation to another and continue to use the same terminology in the same way? I don't think so. I think there'll always be a certain need to, if you like, relearn the lingo or learn that specific dialect of data quality that's been taught to that organisation. But I do think, you know, having a good standard set, and you know, particularly for organisations who are starting, you know, they're always going to look at what other people have done. There's a number of books that I've read, and you know, you start with, you know, well, actually this is this author's set of definitions and so on. That's the set. I really like them. I'll start with them first. So having ones with the likes of DAMA and the BCS behind to say, actually, these are a good set would definitely help organisations anyway.
Just one question.
Uh-huh.
I like the idea of, first of all, thank you for the presentation. I like the idea of aligning the risks to other areas of risk within the organisation. How was that received by the leaders of the business?
Well, I have to say, in fairness, it's kind of at an embryonic stage. It's my thinking and what I'm trying to explore just now. I've certainly tested it with a couple of other data quality practitioners around the organisation, and they've thought it sounds a good thing to do. What, you know, from my perspective, what I actually need to do is actually sit down with the risk people and say, can I fit this in with your framework, please? Can I actually almost start to embed as part of the standard risk methodology for the organisation? Can we actually include data quality as a type of risk within your framework?
Okay, time for one more question if we've got one. No, okay, that's it then. So, okay, thank you, Kenneth. That's been excellent.
Thank you very much.